Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Protected from Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. This is a story about the one time I had an encounter with a real dog man. It's also a story about my best dog friend of all time. His name was Skipper. He was a big old Malamute. I didn't name him, my brother Dirk did, but Skipper and I became much closer friends than he was with my brother. He was a husky, so that meant he wasn't far removed from being a wolf, and he needed a lot of exercise every single day or he would just freak out. I loved to play fetch and frisbee with him and take him to the park, and he repaid me by being my best friend. Skipper always looked out for me. When someone would raise their voice, Skipper would growl and make them stop yelling. He would always get between me and anyone who was unhappy. He made it clear that to get to me, you'd have to go through him, and nobody got to me. Not ever. One time, we took Skipper with us on a vacation to Lake Murray in South Carolina. My parents had rented us a cabin, really just one room with bunk beds, and so the four of us, Mama, Papa, Dirk the Jerk, and I, all had to share this tiny space and get on each other's nerves even more than usual. So Skipper and I went out for long walks and spent as much of the day to ourselves as possible. That evening, we were heading back, and it was starting to get dark. I heard a strange echo. Every time I would step down, I would hear an echo behind me and to my right. Then I noticed that Skipper started looking back in that direction as well. Just to see what would happen, I stopped short, and I distinctly heard someone or something stop short right after me, behind and to the right. Now Skipper was growling. I turned and looked, not knowing what I was expecting to see, but all that was there was a bunch of trees and foliage. I walked backward for a while, watching the woods. I didn't hear the echo any longer, but I hadn't heard whoever it was walk away either. I had a pretty good idea of their general location, and I felt as though I were being watched right then. I whispered to Skipper to run, and I dropped his leash. In the same instant, I turned and ran, away from the lurker in the woods. I was instantly surprised by the two things in the next split second. First, Skipper didn't run ahead of me in the road. He ran off into the woods instead. I was shocked and hurt that he would be disloyal to me. But I had other things to worry about because I could hear the lurker crashing out of the woods behind me. Risking a glance over my shoulder, I nearly tripped and fell when I saw what was chasing me. It was much larger than a man, and at the shoulders it was much wider as well. It had fur or hair all over and was darkly colored except for its bright red glowing eyes. It was a dog-like, demonic monster bear thing, and it was literally inches behind me. Maybe I thought Skipper knew something I didn't, or maybe my body was overruling my mind at that moment, but for some reason I tore into the woods. I heard Skipper barking off in the distance and ran in that general direction. There was a strange sort of little stone room there in the woods. I don't know how else to describe it. It had a small entrance I had to duck down to get into, and I had to stoop inside as well. I don't really know what the dirt floor structure was, but I know I hid in the furthest, darkest corner, hoping against hope that the wolf-headed bear man would not notice me in there. No such luck. It wasn't long before I could hear him sniffing the ground outside the stone room. Now he howled, and it echoed inside my little prison, hurting my ears. Why was it howling? Was it calling its people to come for dinner? I shivered all over, not knowing how I could possibly get out of this insane situation. I never felt so helpless. The creature reached out a long, hairy arm into the opening, and I screamed. But then I could see that it wasn't able to reach me. It was too large to fit through the opening, and its arms weren't long enough to grab me. At least this bought me some time. The wolfman walked away from the door of the room, and I wondered if he had really left. I sat there in the dark listening. How long should I wait before poking my head outside, I wondered. Then, through the ground underneath me, I could feel something large approaching at a fast pace. Suddenly, something smashed heavily into the wall just to my right, and I screamed in surprise. But nothing moved. The wall hadn't been budged even a little bit. The big bad wolf man was trying to huff and puff and blow my house in, but he wasn't getting anywhere. I felt a renewed sense of hope, accepting that I was just going to have to wait this out. Sooner or later, someone would find me. Everything was going to be all right. I closed my eyes and decided to try to rest for a while. Then something hit me, hard. I opened my eyes as it hit me again. What is it? A branch. A long branch. Looking at the door to the room, I saw the dog-headed bear was poking me with a long branch. It had hands like a human, and it had the ability to create and use tools. This was not an ordinary animal. I backed to the other corner, where he had no direct line to poke me. I was technically closer to him, but still harder to reach. I don't remember how long he tried to get me out of there, but it felt like an hour. At some point I heard barking, and my heart sank as I expected that was the wolfman's tribe or family coming to help him get me out of this stone sanctuary. The bark was too familiar, though. It was Skipper coming back. That was just as terrifying, though, to me, as I didn't want my dog to be anywhere near the monster outside. I could hear the dogman run away, but I couldn't tell if he was running towards Skipper or away. Then I heard both of my parents calling my name, and I realized Skipper hadn't abandoned me at all. He had run to get my parents to rescue me. I ran outside like an idiot, not even looking to see if the dogman had actually left or not. I wanted to warn my family as much as I wanted to get out of there myself. When I saw my parents, I waved, but I didn't even slow down to say hello. I just kept running. I guess they got the idea and ran after me because we were soon back in camp, where I drank up half our water supply in a minute before trying to tell them what I'd seen. I wanted to go home right away, but my dad reminded me that if it hadn't been a werewolf, then it might have been a bear or a mountain lion, or who knows what that had menaced me. He suggested I stick to the lakeside area and not go into the forest alone anymore. That made a lot of sense. If you go walking on turf belonging to predators, you can't be surprised if you get yourself in trouble. I was acting like I was taking a walk in the park, but in reality, I was walking on the private hunting grounds of the South Carolina Dogman.
OMG! Join Scary Stories creator Peter Bernard in... Does that say Boxburg? Where is that, yo? Oh wait, down here it says Peter's gonna be at the Northeast Comic Con with Billary West from Futurama and Akira Takarada from Godzilla. Why was it telling me to say he was in Boxburg? Why would someone want to go to Boxburg if they could go to the Northeast Comic Con instead, yo? LOL, whoever wrote this script sure is silly, yo. LOL. That's Thanksgiving weekend after you're done with your tofurkey. Don't miss it.
Saturday Morning Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by our old pal, Bigfoot.
Back in the 1970s, before most of cable TV had come into existence, there were no TV channels entirely devoted to children's programming. Most kids' TV was on in the afternoons after school, which was cheap local programming and reruns, or Saturday morning, which was network national TV and featured brand new shows which would debut each September. So to lighten the horror of going back to school, we would get to look forward to the new cartoons coming on Saturday morning. There would be big 2-page ads taken out in our favorite comic books, and we would check what shows were on against which, and plan which channels we would have on at what time. I remember even writing it down on paper. Sometimes if I wanted to watch two shows that were on against each other, I'd ask a friend to watch one and I'd watch the other. Then we'd report back to each other and use that info to determine the important decision of which show we would watch the following week. So you can imagine my surprise when one of my uncles got cast as a character in a Saturday morning preview special. Oh wait, I guess I should explain what a Saturday morning preview special was. See, each September, usually 2 out of 3 of the networks would put on a half-hour special airing the Friday night before the big debut Saturday morning. It would usually star someone that had nothing to do with any of the shows, like Burns and Schreiber, but then they would have characters in costumes playing the cartoon characters. They'd hang out with the hosts and show us a preview clip of their show, which would air in full the following morning. I would take notes during all of these specials and review my notes carefully afterward. So anyway, my Uncle Vito, not his real name, got cast to play a certain superhero I shan't name in a Saturday morning preview special. He got to introduce a clip of a certain superhero cartoon from that era. I loved seeing Uncle Vito on TV, but as a kid, it bothered me that he didn't sound anything like the character in the cartoon, and he didn't look much like the character either. But still, it was my Uncle Vito, and I was very proud of him. We called him on the phone the next afternoon. This was back in the day when an entire family would call someone. He wanted to talk to me personally, and he told me to take the phone away from the rest of the family. My mom gave me permission to use the phone in her bedroom, and she hung up after I got the call upstairs. So, my uncle told me that he had seen Bigfoot. He knew I was really interested in Bigfoot. He made me swear to secrecy before telling me the story, though. He said the rest of the family would think he was crazy. And if people thought he was crazy, he wouldn't get hired, so this had to be just between the two of us. That was fine by me, so he told me this story, which is not at all about a Bigfoot, as it turns out. At least I don't think so. Okay, this literally happened to Uncle Vito on the way driving home from shooting the September Saturday morning preview show. He'd gotten lost getting back on the highway and was driving through an area of California he was unfamiliar with, on a narrow, winding road passing through an area heavily wooded with tropical fruit trees, palm trees, and deciduous trees. When he was telling me the story, he was explaining that he was fascinated by the variety of trees all in one area, and that's probably why he noticed the creature that was inside the tree line. It was as large as a bear and brown, but it appeared to be running far faster than any bear could run, and it was running on its hind legs. Uncle Vito said it felt like the world turned sideways, upside down, and in on itself. Nothing made sense any longer. The creature was running down an incline toward the road, and it looked like it might run smack into Uncle Vito's car. He had to decide quickly whether to speed up and try to get past the thing, or to slow down and let it pass at a safe distance in front of him. He told me he wasn't sure he could pass it in time, and he'd always wanted to see a Bigfoot, so he decided to stop well short of the creature, say 100 or 150 feet away, and wait idling in the road for it to pass. The thing is, as he slowed down, the creature turned more in his direction. The slower he got, the further to its left the creature turned. No matter what he did, that thing was heading straight for his car. I asked him to continue, and he said he was trying to, but he had to tell me something that he wasn't sure I was ready to hear. It was a struggle to get him to continue, and it looked like he was having great difficulty speaking. Finally, he just blurted it out. "Bigfoot doesn't look like they show him on TV," he said, looking at me pitifully. He seemed to be in great emotional pain over this whole sighting. I asked him, "Well, Uncle Vito, what does Bigfoot look like then?" He had a really hard time saying it because he knew I would be surprised. But he told me, Bigfoot has a head much more like a dog than like an ape. Okay, that did surprise me, and I let out a laugh at the time. That was the worst thing I could have done, because it made Uncle Vito clam up. And it was the last he spoke to me about the subject for over a year. I regretted laughing almost immediately, but his reaction assured me that he was utterly sincere. He wouldn't have been so upset at my laughing if he had been joking around. So, a year or two later, I caught him at a family gathering when he was in a mellow mood. I eventually got him comfortable enough that he was willing to finally tell me the rest of the story about what he was calling Bigfoot, but which sounded much more like some sort of werewolf-type creature to me. I didn't use the word werewolf at the time, either out loud or in my head. I think I actually thought of it internally as a dogman or man-dog. I hadn't heard the term dogman yet back then, and I didn't think of upright walking canids as werewolves either. I thought a werewolf was a fictional creature from old Abbott and Costello movies. So the word never entered my head, but I still immediately thought my uncle had seen something other than Bigfoot. So to pick up the story from where we left off, the dog-headed hairy monster was racing toward Uncle Vito's car, no matter what speed he drove at. He probably should have sped up, but illogically, he slowed down to a stop, and soon the creature was directly in front of his car, facing him and blocking the road. Uncle Vito told me that Bigfoot barked at him like a dog, but with the deepest voiced bark he'd ever heard. He said he felt insane at that moment, sitting in his car and staring out at a dog-headed Bigfoot. He told me the strangest thing I'd ever heard. He said he wished at that moment that he could faint. He just didn't want to be there anymore and wished he could be unconscious or asleep. Considering that the creature could have killed him then, and he would have been defenseless, I figure that monster must have been remarkably ugly and frightening looking. So the rest of the story is just one surreal dream. The creature did things in front of the car to terrify my Uncle Vito, yet stayed right there in front. It didn't attempt to break in, and it didn't attempt to kill him. What it did was stand tall and shout, then bend forward and bark. It pounded on the hood of the vehicle. It kept my poor uncle completely terrified for over 10 minutes. He wept in his driver's seat, and he wet himself, and he told me he was convinced he was a goner. Then, suddenly, the creature just turned away and walked into the bushes off of the side of the road. Gunning the engines, my uncle drove out of there, crying like a little baby. I was amazed and impressed by the story and immediately had a theory. Maybe the creature fed off of his fear. My uncle thought that was a dumb idea because he was certain he was encountering a predatory carnivore. I told him that it's a standard theory about ghosts that they appear to frighten people, then feed off the fear their appearance generates. My uncle grew furious at me and shouted, "This was no ghost." Maybe not, but I still don't think that what he encountered was a natural animal either. I think it was something that manifested in order to scare him and feed. When it had its fill, it left. I could be wrong, but that's just my take on his story. Oh, a few years ago, I went on a Dogman kick, watching every Dogman video I could find on the internet and sending most of them to my uncle. I asked him if he ever noticed the back legs of the creature, Were they Bigfoot-style legs or Dogman-style legs? He didn't answer my emails, but I saw him at Thanksgiving, and he told me honestly he didn't remember the legs at all. He just remembered seeing it running very quickly. He did think that I might be right, and it might have been a Dogman and not Bigfoot. At the time when it happened, he had never heard of Dogman, so he just called it a Bigfoot and thought Bigfoot had a dog head. He disagrees with me to this day about the creature being paranormal, though. He says that what he saw was flesh and blood, and that's the only thing he knows for sure about it. He doesn't know why it went for him and shouted at him, but he thinks it might be that he was invading the creature's turf. He thinks the creature backed off and left after realizing he was no threat. He doesn't think we need to go to the paranormal to explain what happened to him, but I still differ. At least we talked it out, and we're friends again, and I guess that's the most important part. It turns out, playing that superhero that time was the biggest appearance on TV of my uncle's life. He did a couple or 3 commercials after that, but they were local to his area and I didn't get to see them. He never appeared on national TV again. Be that as it may, I, for one, will never forget the year my Uncle Vito got a first-hand, up-close, September preview of the Dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LISCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
The Giant Dog in the Forest, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by our old pal, Bigfoot.
Back in the 90s, I had this strange one-off cryptid experience with my buddy while we were out camping. We saw a dog that was too large to possibly be real, and yet we both saw it at the same time. This was not a Dogman sighting or a werewolf sighting. This was really more like a dinosaur sighting. We saw it from a distance. I'm not sure exactly how far away, but it was not close. Nevertheless, we could see it clearly because it was just so large. It decided to sit down and groom before returning to the forest, so we got to watch it for maybe almost a full minute. We watched as it rubbed its back against a thick tree branch, scratching an itch he couldn't reach while grooming. The next morning, we packed up camp quickly, then walked down to that branch. Turns out it had to be 25 or 30 feet off the ground. We could see the dog's hair stuck in the bark of the branch over our heads, and we knew we hadn't imagined what we saw the night before. For those of you who will say we should have climbed up that tree and gotten some of the hair for DNA testing, this was the 1990s. Nevertheless, we did discuss the idea of one of us climbing up there for a trophy to prove our sighting. The thing is, we discussed it while scooting back to our pickup truck as quickly as we could. You can't understand the kind of fear that shot through me when I saw that hair so high off the ground. I tried to imagine if the dog came back, how tiny we would be in comparison to him. I nearly passed out on the spot. The entire way back to the truck, I was either seeing spots or feeling like I was going to get sick to my stomach. I felt like we were in great danger, and I just wanted to go. We discussed reporting the encounter, but who would we report it to? The police would laugh at us. Animal control would tell us that what we saw doesn't exist. Bigfoot hunters would tell us we saw a Bigfoot. UFO hunters would tell us we saw an alien. Who could we have gone to that would have just listened to us and studied the case from that angle? This sighting made me interested in cryptozoology and all encounters with anomalous animals and things. In all I've read since those days, though, I've never heard or read of any other person seeing anything even vaguely like what my friend and I saw on that day. Did we see something that only existed on that one day? How could an animal that large just come into existence, leave fur and bark on a tree, then cease to exist forever? How could there only be one of them? If it was a real animal, it had to have been born. It needed two parents. Likely, if it were real, it would have mated. There would need to be more than one of the creatures. Was that the last member of a dying species that we sighted? To this day, I have no explanation for the giant dog in the forest.
The ghost that imitated my cat, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by our old pal, Bigfoot.
When I was a kid, I had a cat that was entirely white. It had a very strange meow, although I didn't know that at the time. I've had over a dozen cats since then, but I never met one with the same kind of meow. It always sounded like he was talking to you or chattering like a monkey. He would do it when he was excited, like when I would break out his favorite toys, or when he wanted me to break out his toys but I didn't. When he would chase the other cat in our apartment, he would make sounds like a bird chirping or something. He was a weirdo, but he was a lovable weirdo, and he was great to have around. When he got old and less active, he would often disappear entirely between breakfast and dinner, hiding somewhere so he could sleep in private. I never did find his hiding spot. Anyway, when he would be off sleeping somewhere, I would hear him meowing. It would come sometimes from the next room, but other times it would sound like it was coming from right next to me. Needless to say, he was not there when the sound was occurring. One day, I heard the sound coming from our guest room. It was definitely positively coming from in there. I heard it from outside the room. I went to the doorway, and the sound was coming from there. I went inside the room, and it got louder. It was coming from in this room, but I didn't know where. I got down on my hands and knees and looked under the bed. I moved everything under the bed out, and the cat was not anywhere, yet the strange meowing persisted. I got the shock of my life when I turned around, and the cat was walking in the room to see what I was doing. He was behind me, yet the sound had come from in front of me. Eventually, that cat died, and I never heard the strange meowing again. However, ever since then, I have heard the meowing of my two black and white cats, even when I know it can't be possibly them making the sound. Something in our apartment, in some way, is a cat mimic. It's either a ghost, or an invisible humanoid, or it's an echo or anomaly in the house that I can't comprehend. If you ask my wife, it's a ghost that imitates cats. So maybe that's exactly what it is. The head with legs, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. When I was a kid, I lived in a cottage in the woods with my grandmother. My parents had died when I was very young, and so Grandma was the only parent I ever knew. She homeschooled me, and I was always 2 years ahead of the public school curriculum. She would bring me to community centers so I could socialize with the regular kids and arranged play dates with children of my late parents' friends so that I could socialize with people of that social class. Grandma made it clear she preferred the regular people to the elite, but it had been my parents' wish for me to be socialized into high society, and hence the play dates. Grandma would tell me that high society gives you more than you ever thought you wanted, but ends up taking more than you knew you needed. I wasn't sure what that meant, but I knew it couldn't be a good thing. When it was sunny at Grandma's, it was the sunniest kind of sunny. It was the warmest, the most like a fairy tale, and the most wonderful kind of day. Most of my childhood was made up of weeks and months of those kinds of amazing and unforgettable days. But when it was rainy at Grandma's house, her old injuries would act up, and she would be in a lot of pain. With her distracted, all that was unkind about the area manifested itself, or came out of hiding. It no longer felt like a nice place to be, and I was genuinely frightened just to be there. At first, I liked watching lightning storms. Then, one day, I saw lightning strike a tree in our yard, and out of that burning tree, I saw something spring to life that shouldn't be. I was lost in thought, gazing out the window when the lightning and thunder struck simultaneously, tearing the tree into pieces right in front of my eyes. I could feel the electricity even from inside the house, and I saw in my reflection that my hair was standing on end. My eyes were a bit blinded and my ears were ringing. Both would need time to recover. When I closed my eyes, I could see the exact path of the lightning still burned into my retina. When I opened them, I realized it would be a while before I was sure what I was seeing at all. But it sure did look like something was coming out of that burning tree. Something that wasn't burning. In the dark, that made it even harder to see. Sometimes I would think it was gone, then it would come out of the shadows and I could see it again. I kept blinking my eyes and resting them, then trying to peer into the darkness again. Each time, I got a little closer to normal vision, but I still wasn't getting a clear idea of what I was looking at. Something was coming toward me from the burning tree. Was it rolling downhill? Was it being propelled somehow? Was it walking under its own power? And most important, what the heck was it? Now, if you're wondering why I hadn't called my grandmother into the room, it was late at night and I knew better than to wake her. Besides, if the thunder hadn't woken her up, there wasn't much chance I was going to be able to. I knew from previous experience that once she started snoring at night, I was pretty much on my own until she got up in the morning. So I sat there, blinking, trying to see into the night outside my window. And then, it was there, right on the other side of the glass. It was a head, but not like one I had ever seen before. It was in many ways like a human head, because it had a bit of a forehead, then two front-facing eyes, an apparent nose in the center under the eyes, and a gelatinous, ever-moving orifice under the nose. It was green and seemed to be a kind of organic jello, but milkier, not as transparent. Under the head were tiny little arms or legs, more like fingers really, kind of like a head placed on a hand or a spider, which it used for locomotion. It climbed up next to my window, Wide-eyed, it stared directly at me, and it screamed. It screamed like it was in pain, over and over. I wet myself, then ran and grabbed clean pajamas and straight into the bathroom where I took a shower. Drying myself, I put the dirty clothes in the hamper, changed into the clean ones, then hid myself in Grandma's closet to try to get some sleep. I didn't feel safe, even there, but at least there I could hear when she was starting to wake up in the morning, and then I would know it would be safe to come out. So, from then on, I would never look out the windows when it rained. Not during the day, and not during the night. I would hear that head anyhow, scratching around outside. Sometimes I would hear it screaming in the woods, and I would pull the blanket up over my head. One time, I was playing alone in the forest in the afternoon. It wasn't even raining yet, but I could hear thunder off in the distance. Then, from somewhere nearby, I heard whistling. Someone was whistling, and it was clear they were whistling at me. When I would take a step, they would whistle a note. If I would stop walking, they would stop whistling. If I would speed up, their tune would get quicker in response. It was a pretty scary moment, as you might imagine. I looked around to get my bearings, figured out which way was home, and beat a direct path in that direction as quickly as I could. The reason I include that story in this narrative is because one night, at almost midnight, I was bringing out the garbage when I saw the head, standing off in the shadows by a tree. It took a few sideways crab-like steps out into the light and it whistled at me. I squealed and ran inside, thoroughly terrified by that green, wobbly little thing. So, I went to college with that social class which Grandma disapproved of, and I went on to have a life more like what my parents would have wanted. Until I was 30, and then it all came tumbling down. My girlfriend dumped me. My business partner got caught in some financial scam, which meant I was implicated and had to spend a lot of money and time to clear my name. And then, because bad things happen in threes, I got the news that Grandma had died. Needing a break, and because someone had to deal with the business of her death, I moved back in temporarily to my old childhood home. I brought 2 assistants with me. I was hardly roughing it. The 2 of them had the place set up as my base of operations, so I could do anything I needed from there, my grandma's little cottage out in the woods. I had really almost forgotten about the head with the tiny legs that came out in the lightning storms. I'd sort of swept all my brain's thoughts about that stuff under the rug inside my mind, assuming it was some fabrication of childhood or misinterpretation or something. I never warned either of the 2 young ladies who were assisting me about the head because, We're talking about memories from childhood of a green gelatinous monster head running around on crab legs. How exactly does one warn office assistants about impossible old memories? And so, the first night we were there during a thunderstorm, we all paid for this omission on my part. One of the ladies was watching the lightning much as I had been during that night so many years prior. And, just like me, she suddenly screamed. Backing away from the window and tilting her chair over in the process, she and a small table with some breakables on it went flying and shattering all over the place. Running over to help her, I saw it outside the window, and the other young woman saw it too. It was the head with legs. The girl who had fallen was injured and groggy. The other two of us helped her to her feet and walked her to the front door. We needed to get her in the car and to drive her to the closest hospital. As we opened the door to take a step out toward the car, the green head was suddenly there at our feet, gibbering and snarling like an animal. I heard the other girls crying out in pain, and I saw that the creature was biting at their ankles. I kicked it away and we all ran for the car. The head made repeated attacks, drawing blood from our lower legs on multiple occasions and getting kicked into the bushes over and over for his efforts. Maybe the head and legs were gelatinous and wobbly, but those teeth were certainly solid and sharp enough. Once we got in the car, it was smooth sailing to the hospital, but both girls asked me to negotiate for severance packages the very next day, and then they were gone. I hired some other people to handle my grandma's estate, and this time, I specifically warned them, stay away if the weatherman says anything at all about rain.
Well, we hope you've had a good time. Follow the instructions on the exit signs, and we'll see you next time on Scary Stories.
Come back for more scary stories.